Thanks for joining me again today. Today we're going to be reading 3 chapters of the Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane because the first chapter is kind of short. And when we last left, our friends Sarah, Ruth, and Bryce were living in a little shack with Edward. And if you remember, Sarah Ruth is very sick. She's got a terrible cough. It's hard for her to breathe and talk. And Bryce has been taking very good care of her. All right, let's find out what happens. Here we go. Chapter 19. The days passed. The sun rose and set again and again. Sometimes the father came home, and sometimes he did not. Edward's ears became soggy, but he did not care. His sweater had almost completely unraveled. It didn't bother him. He was hugged half to death, but it felt good. In the evenings, at the hands of Bryce and at the ends of twine, Edward would dance and dance. 1 month passed, and then 2, and then 3. Sarah Ruth got worse. In the 5th month, she refused to eat. And in the 6th month, her breathing became ragged and uncertain, as if she was trying to remember in between breaths what to do and how to breathe. "Breathe, honey," Bryce stood over her and said. "Breathe," thought Edward from deep inside of her arms. "Please, please, please breathe." Bryce stopped leaving the house. He sat at home all day and held Sarah Ruth in his lap, and he rocked her back and forth, and he sang to her. But on a bright morning in September, Sarah Ruth stopped breathing. "Oh, no," said Bryce. "Honey, take a little breath, please." Edward had fallen out of Sarah Ruth's arm the night before, and she had not asked for him again. So face down on the floor with his arms over his head, Edward just listened as Bryce cried. He listened as the father came home and started to shout at Bryce. He listened as the father cried. "You can't cry," Bryce shouted. "You got no right to cry. You never even loved her. You didn't know anything about love." "I loved her," said the father. "I loved her." "I loved her too," thought Edward. "I loved her, and now she is gone. How can this be?" he wondered. How could he live in a world without Sarah Ruth? The yelling between the father and son continued. And then there was the terrible moment when the father wrapped Sarah Ruth up in a blanket and he carried her away. The small house became very quiet. Edward could hear Bryce moving around and talking to himself, and then finally the boy picked Edward up. "Come on, Jangles," Bryce said. "We're leaving. We're going to Memphis." Chapter 20. "How many dancing rabbits have you seen in your life?" Bryce said to Edward. "I can tell you how many I seen. Only one, and that's you. And that's how me and you are going to make us some money. I seen it last time I went to Memphis. Folks put on any kind of show they want right here on the street corner. People paying money for doing it. I seen it." The walk to town took all night long. Bryce walked without stopping, carrying Edward under one arm and talking to him the whole time. Edward tried to listen. But that terrible scarecrow feeling had come back, the feeling that he had when he was hanging by his ears in the old woman's garden, the feeling that nothing in the world mattered, that nothing would ever matter again. And not only did Edward feel hollow inside, he hurt. Every part of his china body hurt. He ached for Sarah Ruth. He wanted her to hold him. He wanted to dance for her. And he did dance, but it was not for Sarah Ruth. Edward danced for strangers on a dirty street corner in Memphis. Bryce played his harmonica and moved Edward's strings, and Edward bowed and shuffled and swayed, and people stopped to stare, and they pointed and laughed. On the ground in front of them was Sarah Ruth's little button box. The lid was open to encourage people to put money inside of it. "Mama," said a small child, "look at the bunny. I want to touch him." Then he reached out his hand towards Edward. "Ooh, no," said the mother. "That's dirty." She pulled the child back away from Edward. "Ooh, it's nasty," she said. A man wearing a hat stopped and stared at Edward and Bryce. It ain't right for rabbits to dance, the man said. And then he took off his hat and he held it over his heart and he stood and watched the boy and the rabbit for a long time. And then finally he put his hat back on his head and he just walked away. The shadows lengthened. The sun became an orange, dusty ball low in the sky. Bryce started to cry. Edward could see his tears landing on the pavement. But the boy did not stop playing his harmonica, and he did not make Edward stop dancing. Then an old woman, leaning on a cane, stepped up close to them. She stared at Edward with deep, dark eyes. Pellegrina? Thought the rabbit, dancing. She nodded at him. Look at me, he said to her. His arms and legs were jerking about. Look at me. You got your wish. I have learned how to love. It's terrible. My heart is broken. It's broken. Help me. The old woman just turned and hobbled away. Come back, thought Edward. Fix me. Bryce cried harder. He made Edward dance faster. Finally, when the sun was gone and streets were dark, Bryce stopped playing his harmonica. I'm done now, he said. Then he let Edward fall to the pavement. I ain't gonna cry about this no more. Then Bryce wiped his nose and his eyes with the back of his hand, and he picked up the button box and he looked inside it. Hey, we got us enough money to get me something to eat, he said. Come on, Jangles, let's go. Chapter 21. The diner was called Neil's. The word was written in big red neon letters that flashed on and off. Inside, it was warm and bright, and it smelled like fried chicken and toast and coffee. Bryce sat at the counter and put Edward on a stool next to him. He leaned the rabbit's forehead up against the counter so that it would not fall. So, what you gonna have now, sugar? The waitress asked Bryce. Yeah, give me some pancakes, said Bryce, and eggs, and I want steak too. I want a big old steak, and I'd like some toast and some coffee. The waitress leaned forward and pulled at one of Edward's ears and then pushed him backwards so she could see his face. This your rabbit? She said to Bryce. Yes'm, he's mine now. He did belong to my sister, though. Bryce wiped his nose with the back of his hand. We're in show business, he says. Me and him. Oh, is that right? Said the waitress. She had a name tag on the front of her dress. Marlene, it said. She looked at Edward's face, and then she let go of his ear, and he fell forward so that his head rested on the counter again. Go ahead, Marlene, thought Edward. Push me around. Do what you want. What does it matter? I'm broken. Broken. The food came, and Bryce ate all of it. He didn't even look up from his plate once. Well, you was sure hungry, said Marlene as she cleared away the plates. I reckon show business is very hard work. Yes'm, said Bryce. Marlene tucked the bill under the coffee cup. Bryce picked it up and looked at it, and then he shook his head. Oh, no, I ain't got enough money, he said to Edward. Ma'am, he said to Marlene. She came back to fill up his coffee cup. I ain't got enough for this. What now, sugar? I ain't got enough money. She stopped pouring coffee and looked at him. Ooh, you're going to have to talk to Neil about that. Neil, as it turned out, was both the owner of the diner and the cook. He was a large, red-haired, red-faced man who came out of the kitchen holding a very large spatula in one hand. You came in here hungry, right? He said to Bryce. Yes, sir, said Bryce. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. You ordered some food and I cooked it and Marlene brought it to you, right? I reckon so, said Bryce. You reckon? Said Neil. He brought his spatula down on the countertop without the whack. Bryce jumped. Yes, sir. I mean, no, sir. I cooked it for you, said Neil. Yes, sir, said Bryce, and he picked Edward up off of the stool and held him close. Everybody in the diner had stopped eating. They were all staring at the boy and the rabbit and Neil. Only Marlene looked away. You ordered it. I cooked it. Marlene served it. You ate it. Now, said Neil, I want my money. He tapped the spatula lightly on the counter. Bryce cleared his throat. Well, you ever seen a rabbit dance? He said. How's that? Said Neil. Well, you ever before in your life seen a rabbit dance? Bryce, said Edward on the floor, and started to pull the strings that were hooked to his feet, making him do a slow shuffle. He put his harmonica in his mouth and he played a sad song that went along with the dance. Somebody laughed. Bryce took the harmonica out of his mouth and said, well, he could dance some more if he wanted to. Maybe he could dance to pay for all the food I ate. Neil stared at Bryce. Then without warning, he reached down and he grabbed hold of Edward. This is what I think of dancing rabbits, he said. And he swung Edward by the feet and he swung him, and then his head hit the edge of the counter really hard. And then there was a loud crack, and then Bryce screamed. And then the world, Edward's world, went black. And I'm sorry to tell you that is where I'm stopping, because sometimes I'm kind of mean and I like to stop at very suspenseful parts in a book. But, yikes! I'm glad that there's more to the book. We still have, I think, 6 chapters left. So at least it's not over. But it seems like it's over for Edward. His whole world has gone black. What does that mean? What will Bryce do? Sometimes books can make you feel desperate. Sometimes books make you want to read all night long, which is what I did the first time I read this book. I couldn't put it down, especially at this part. But here's where I want you to sit and think, and I want you to think about what could possibly happen next, what could possibly be in the next 6 chapters of this book. How is it going to end? Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think could happen next. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry to end on such a suspenseful chapter, but I can't wait to see you on Monday, where we'll read more and we'll find out what happens. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.